Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today I'd like to continue on with the Q&A videos. Once again, I've been very fortunate and lucky to have been able to receive more questions from you, my dear friends and viewers. So I thank you very much for continuing to express an interest in what it is I have to say and what it is I have to think. So thank you very much for that. I'm very honored. And so with that, I'd like to continue with this video. And by my count, we are now at Q&A part 18. Where I last left off, and the question is from Patrick Touma. So hello Patrick, and you ask, hello Daisuke, I have a question for you. What are your views on movie piracy? Okay, so movie piracy, so this is generally speaking acts that involve distributing films that have copyright, or selling films that have copyright without the permission or license from the relevant copyright holder. So that's my general understanding of what piracy is. Of course, these are reliant on relevant intellectual property and copyright laws, and as you know, these laws can differ depending on the country or jurisdiction that one is involved with. And so we have to understand, if you want a specific definition of movie piracy, then one would need to go to the specific laws of the relevant jurisdiction to get a really specific definition that is based in relevant copyright law. But as a general proposition, piracy, or the question or the word piracy, is as I described it. So that's my understanding. So what are my views on that as I have described it just now? So I have to say that I don't cast, or let me take this back, let me just restart again. I make a point to do my best whenever I am talking with someone who might make mention of movie piracy acts. I make it a point to never cast any kind of moral judgment on that person, because I don't own the rights to that particular work usually. So if I were the copyright holder of a particular work that was the subject of movie piracy, then I think my position would be very different. I would be on the side of the rights holder, because I would be the rights holder, and therefore I would have something very much to say against any acts of movie piracy that occurred without my permission. So that's one scenario. But the other scenario is that it's not my decision, because I don't own the rights. And so because I don't own the rights to a particular work that might be subject to movie piracy acts, then I don't necessarily, I don't necessarily think it's appropriate for me per se to make any kind of moral judgment on a particular person, because the issue ultimately comes down to the issue between the person committing the act and the person or the party to whom the rights belong. And so if I'm neither party, then it really isn't my direct business. And so that's the reason why I try to avoid casting any kind of moral judgment on anyone. That being said, speaking for me, I have a particular position in my own life right now where I am an attorney, And while I don't necessarily work on matters or have any representations of clients with respect to specific matters of movie piracy or copyright infringement, nevertheless, I do find myself working on a number of matters where I am on the side or the position of trying to protect the relevant intellectual property rights of a particular party or client. And that can be in the form of agreements, that can be in the form of memoranda of understanding, etc., amendments, etc. So the point is that I'm in a position where I am kind of trained to want to protect rights holders, because I find myself in that position almost constantly. And so almost by a kind of habit, I try not to rely on any kind of movie piracy or any kind of copyright infringement in my own particular situation. And so whenever someone might approach me and say, oh, this particular film can be viewed on a downloadable file or something like that, I'll tend to shy away from that, and I'll tend to avoid that. And that's simply because I just want to, I feel like for my own personal situation, because I find myself in situations where I need to protect the integrity of certain intellectual property rights, I feel like in my own private life I should try to set some kind of example for that. So that's just for me personally. And I therefore, in principle, rely on materials that are properly licensed, and those usually translate to Criterion releases, etc. The issue of OOP, out of print, is a little bit different in my eyes, simply because those are no longer being distributed, but rather they are in the secondary market. And so that's a little bit of a kind of a nuanced issue, but still I think it's being involved in out-of-print titles doesn't necessarily compromise my general approach to otherwise copyright infringement issues that I was referring to earlier. So to make a long story short, I try not to cast any moral judgment on anyone else around me, but for me personally, when it comes to let's say files, downloadable files of films that aren't licensed in that manner, I'll usually try to avoid that to the best of my ability, or not to the best of my ability, but I will just avoid that, because I just want to maintain a certain kind of approach to my own movie consumption that is more or less consistent with the types of daily matters that I find in my professional life. And so that's just my own personal approach. But once again, my answer, I don't want my answer at all itself to be itself a kind of moral judgment casting. And so that's my own, but that's my own approach. And so I will always go through the official release, and I will always go through I will always try to honor that and try to uphold that as well. Again, that's just my own personal approach. Is it limiting? I think perhaps potentially yes, because there's also this idea, which is at the heart of the tension of this idea of intellectual property rights and intellectual property protection, namely the free dissemination of information, which is also a very key component of any free democratic society. So there's always a fine balance that needs to be struck. The fine balance that needs to be struck in terms of protecting artists and protecting creators, and thus promoting and encouraging the creation of stuff, of the creative output. and also, on the other hand, the free dissemination of information. In other words, the more information that is widely disseminated, the more informed and educated the general population is. And so what's the balance between the two? And depending on the situation, of course, maybe there might be specific instances of movie piracy that could be said to be justifiable. Justified, not, but justifiable. In other words, there could be a colorable argument that could be made, that could be a reasonable argument in favor of the dissemination of the information versus the protection of the rights holder. And so this is a kind of case-by-case basis, but I still acknowledge also that there are rules and there are laws, and so those must be obeyed to the extent reasonable. And so, again, and that translates into my own general approach for me personally. But I guess that, I hope that answers the question. I'm sorry if it was a little bit muddled, but I hope I was making myself clear. But it's a really great question. And then you have another question, which is, hello again, Daisuke. I have a question for you. Do you assign a rating to the films you watch, as in 7 out of 10 or B? What are your views on assigning a film a rating? Okay, so I should be clear. So when I was first dabbling in this app called Letterboxd, or not app, but this site called Letterboxd, I tried the rating system thing. I tried to, assign stars, and I think there might be a few of those reviews, those early Letterboxd reviews that I tried to dabble in, where I tried to assign a star rating. But ultimately, for me personally, right now, I don't assign any star rating, or I don't assign any kind of quantifiable rating system to the films that I watch. And I think for me personally, the reason why I don't rely on a kind of quantifiable rating system is because I think it's very difficult for me to do so. It's so difficult to judge. In my mind, if a film gets an A for me and another film gets an A, therefore they should be equal, right? But maybe within the realm of the A's, there can be different gradations and different subsections of ratings beyond the A plus A minus subsections. And so my point is that there's so much complexity and nuance in film that makes it almost impossible for me to assign a rating without eternally questioning it. And so in order to avoid that eternal questioning, I'd rather just go without the rating system for me personally and just try to evaluate the films on that basis. And so as of now, I don't rely on any kind of rating system. Now, I should be very clear as well. When I talk about a film on this channel, I never think of my film videos as reviews. I never think of them as reviews. And because I think of these videos more like, on the one hand, of course, I'm trying to transmit information to you, my friends and viewers. I'm trying to tell you what it is I'm thinking. But at the same time, I don't necessarily want to, I don't think it's necessary for me to make myself absolutely clear to the point that I have to quantify what it is I believe about a certain film in the form of a rating. I think that my reaction to a film tends to be very all over the place and sort of free flowing, and in that sense, that's the way I like to approach cinema. And so, as much as this is a video-based YouTube channel, wherein I upload videos and I hope that you enjoy watching them, of course. It is also a primary outlet for me just to try to work out certain issues and certain things of my own personal film journey, of the films that I'm watching, and try to express them to myself in words. And so that is the exercise that is key for me, is to try to express what it is I'm feeling in words rather than try to rely on a rating system for me. And so it's that act of trying to talk about a film which is my way of kind of evaluating it or judging it, or really trying to react to it. And so for me, that's enough, and I can't necessarily add to that with trying to apply a rating. I think that's very difficult for me. But I think also I see the value of rating systems. And I see a lot of YouTubers and reviewers and critics, of course, that rely on a rating system, which is very helpful also because it helps the readers and the viewers to understand what the critics' views are in a very easy to understand way. And one of the jobs of critics and reviewers, and also just one of the points of videos on YouTube in a certain point of view, of course, is to try to find ways to express and transmit the ideas that we have in a way that are easily digestible and easily understandable to those who are receiving them. I mean, that's the nature of communication. How can I communicate to you in the best, easiest to understand possible way? How can I convey to you what it is I want to say? And for some people, that can be conveyed easily in the form of a grade, and then for other, or a score or something. But for other people, that can be more easily conveyed in the form of a discussion. And maybe I fall in the latter camp rather than in the former camp. Now, again, that's just only part of the equation, because also the other side, how does the other side, the side that is receiving these transmissions, how does he or she react? Do they really understand what it is that's being transmitted, or is it difficult to understand? And sometimes the rating system, when compared to the talking way of communicating, is understandably a very easy, very recognizable signal. And so I understand the value of rating systems in that context. However, again, it's like the story of the scorpion and the frog, right? I can't help it. It's in my nature. And so I can't help it, because this sort of way of dealing with cinema, it's in my nature. And I tried the rating system before, and it wasn't quite clicking for me. And so I just tend, therefore, to try to be a little bit more free-flowing. Does it work all the time with everyone? Admittedly, no. I don't think this sort of approach works for everyone, and this sort of approach isn't for everyone. So I understand if there might be a lot of people who are disagreeable to my own way of expressing it. But that's just the way I am, as I say. That's just the way I'm made up. Again, I can't help it. It's in my nature. And so to make another long story short, I personally don't use rating systems, but I understand the value of, and I understand why people would rely on them. So hopefully that answers your question. So anyway, but thank you so much for your questions, and I hope you're well. Beau Somers. So hello, Beau. So you say, hello, Daisuke. I hope you're doing well. Recently, I've been reading some books that discuss the topic of the uncanny and what it is and isn't. And I was wondering if you had any films that come to mind that evoke the uncanny feeling remarkably well, whether it be primarily from the direction and blocking or from the story itself. I'm looking to watch many different films that, in your opinion, portray the feeling in the best sense. If you have by any chance discussed this topic in one of your previous videos or Q&As, I apologize for missing it, as I'm still trying to make my way through all of your videos. Thank you for all the wonderful content you've been working on and releasing. Thank you very much, Beau. So that's a very interesting question. So, I admit that I'm not the biggest expert in the uncanny, although I can say, and so maybe my answer will not be at all satisfactory for you, so I apologize in advance, but I can say that maybe the best way for me to answer this question is, when I was in college, I took a number of film studies courses, and one of the film studies courses had a subsection unit on the syllabus where, for about a week or 2 weeks maybe, there was a unit in the film studies course itself where we were talking about the uncanny in cinema. And so some of the films that were on the syllabus for this particular unit, as I recall, again, if my memory serves well of me, some of the films that we were discussing or the professor was discussing were, for example, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari was discussed. Also, some works by Hitchcock were discussed. I seem to recall Psycho and Vertigo were also discussed. Let's see, some of the students had to make presentations during this unit about the uncanny and what they felt were films that represented or captured the idea of the uncanny, in a sort of Freudian analysis. And so I remember some of the presentations were trying to argue or insist, for example, films like, Eyes Without a Face, I remember was brought up. I remember also Halloween, John Carpenter's Halloween was brought up. I didn't make a presentation during that particular unit, but I seem to recall in one of the class discussions, I was trying to make a point that I thought that perhaps we could identify aspects of the uncanny in films of Teshigahara, in particular a film like Face of Another. And so I was trying to make that argument. I don't know if my argument was well received by the class or by the professor, but I think also at the time I was on a little bit of a Teshigahara film kick, and so I think that's why I was focusing on Face of Another. But those are just some films that we discussed, or at least I remember discussing, or that were part of the discussion when this actually came up many, many years ago in a small portion of a larger film class. And so it wasn't the entire film studies class, but it was just a small section. I'm not an expert per se, and I haven't read up a lot about it, but I do remember the discussions that we had and the materials that we read for that particular unit in class. So I don't know if this answers your question, but I hope if it doesn't, I really apologize. But in any event, my friend, thank you so much for your question, and warmest regards. Okay, so let me end the Q&A right there. So I know that there were a number of other questions that were asked, so I apologize for not answering your questions, but I will certainly do my best to address them in future Q&A videos. So thank you so much once again for expressing an interest. And until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. So thank you so much again for your time, my friends, and cheers.